Welcome to the Rust Belt Rundown, brought to you by Rust Belt Recruiting. This podcast is designed to shine a light on the meaningful work being done in Northeast Ohio and the surrounding region. We will convene manufacturing executives and Northeast Ohio business leaders for candid discussions about their business, regional happenings, industry trends, entrepreneurship, and more. Now, let's get running on the rundown.
Okay, welcome everyone to episode 17 of the Rust Belt Rundown. I'm your host, Paul O'Connor, and on this episode, we are joined by Emily Lundgard, Senior Director of State and Local Policy at Enterprise Community Partners. Emily, last episode, we had a Miami University graduate on, so it's only right we balance out the force with the Bobcats. Emily, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, Paul. Yeah, it's good to be representing the Bobcats.
Yeah, Chris Berry was who we had on last. Great guy. You can't fault him for where he chose to pay his tuition, but it's always good to talk to a Bobcat. All right, so bright and early today, this Wednesday morning, 8 a.m. Appreciate you coming on early. We always like to give our guests an opportunity to just introduce themselves as if everyone listening doesn't know who you are and your background. So tell us a little bit more about who Emily Lundgard is.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I am Ohio born and raised, really proud about that. Not originally from Cleveland, actually, grew up in the Dayton area. Been in Cleveland for about 10 years. It's funny, when I first came up here, everybody asked me where I went to high school, assuming I was from the Cleveland area. When I told them I was from Dayton, I was usually met with a lot of funny looks, like, how did you end up here? But
it's not that far of a trip.
Yeah, but even 10 years ago, it was meaningful when people moved to Cleveland, right? It still is today, and it was then. I do love it here. I absolutely love it here. And honestly, I love Ohio. I've sort of bopped around the state, grew up in Dayton, went to school at OU, as we talked about, spent some years down in Columbus, working around the state house, politics down there, until I eventually made it up here to Cleveland. So I've always been engaged in public service. I knew from a really early age that was my passion. That's where I was going to end up. I always blame it on sort of like a very early formed feminism. I had like a very early righteousness from a young age. There's photos of me you can find sort of cheering on my mom. She used to be a runner. My mom was a runner, and I'd be on the sidelines, and I'd have posters like, I am woman, hear me roar, right? The poster was bigger than I, but I'd always sort of had that in me. And I knew I needed to channel that righteousness somewhere, and public service was it. So that's what I've been spending my whole career on in different iterations. You found me on my Twitter page, Paul, so you'll see me there talking about politics and policy. But other than that, I'll say, while I was raised in Dayton, I was raised right. I was raised a Cleveland sports fan. So I'm a pretty diehard Browns fan. I have a tailgate in the Muni, actually, that I do with my husband and another couple. Wow. We've been doing that for years. Yeah, we're pretty diehard. So it's an exciting time.
The draft?
Yeah, we went downtown last night to check it out. It's pretty amazing. We weren't able to snag tickets, but we'll be watching. It's exciting stuff.
Nice.
So if you catch me on Twitter, you'll see me talking about the Browns. Probably standing for Cleveland too. I do a lot of that. So I don't love talking about myself. I don't do it very often. So hopefully I've done an okay job here, Paul.
You've done great, but unfortunately you have another 20 minutes of talking about yourself.
Oh.
Buckle up. So I love the start that you mentioned about how you got, kind of started, or what your motivation was in the public sector. So you got your start there, you stayed there for the majority of your career, but tell us about your experience in the public sector, especially with the Cuyahoga County office. What did a day in communications for the county look like?
Well, before I was the director of communications, I was doing policy work, and it was a really exciting time to be working at the county government. So this is about 10 years ago when I moved up to Cleveland. Brand new form of government, right? We had a lot of corruption up here, and there was an opportunity and momentum and political will to really do things differently. So I hopped into county government doing regional collaboration work. It was this idea of getting our 59 communities to work together, which is really staggering when you think we have 59 different jurisdictions in our relatively small county. And that was great. I loved it. But you know, you got to watch out when you do a job well, they might ask you to do more. And so lo and behold, I was tapped to be the communications director. And frankly, I hadn't done that work, Paul. I had done, policy, government relations, and while media relations was similar, it was definitely a cousin of the work that I had done. So a lot of the same skills, but forced to adapt them in a new and different way. And I did that job for a few years, but I gotta say, it was one of the hardest jobs I've ever had. You know, describing a day, you asked me to describe a day. It was like triage. Every day was a series of urgent, sometimes crises, right? Urgent things to get done. And you just had to work your way down. Whatever was most urgent happened first, and then you tried to get through your day. It was the fastest my day would ever go by. That's for sure. I would blink and it would be 5 p.m. I'm Italian, so I like to eat. And it was the first time in my life that I would miss lunch accidentally. I never understood how people could do that. Happened all the time when I was the communications director. But honestly, it was an exciting time. It was an incredible learning experience, knowing what it's like to be on that side of media requests and speaking on behalf of an elected official, especially one who at the time was running for higher office. And at the end of it, I was ready for a break from government. And that's what kind of led me to my role today. But yeah, an amazing time. Honestly, my heart is in public service and in the government sector. I'll end up there someday. I'll be back there someday.
Man, good for you. I feel like not too many people say that nowadays. My heart is in public service. I mean, it doesn't look, and this leads to our next question, it doesn't look too much fun. So what is a common or the biggest misconception the public has about how either where you worked operates or just government in general operates? What's a big misconception?
Yeah, I love this question. I'm so glad you asked it. I could probably answer in a lot of different ways, but the one that pops to mind for me is the real breadth of demand on a public servant. I think that is often sort of forgotten or not realized by most folks. It is truly mile wide, inch deep type of work, and that you really, it's hard to understand the number and types of things that are constantly coming before folks that work in government. And the way I would always think about it is, because of those demands, there was little time for thinking. It was just doing. So very few, opportunities to sit back and think about things strategically or innovatively. It really is about, getting things done, whatever is the top of that triage list, working your way through it. So that's honestly why I love being in nonprofit now today, and why I value things like nonprofit partners, advocates, dare I say it, lobbyists even. These folks that can take the time to think, to strategize, pull tables of people together, pull coalitions together, convene people. I really value that type of partnership with government, because those are the folks that can bring some of that strategy and innovation in when public servants just don't have the time and capacity to do it.
I think that's where the frustration really, well, besides the last couple of years, the frustration really lies with the public, servants or elected officials, is because a lot of the times they're running on a campaign, they're promising a lot of things, they're saying a lot of things, and then day one, they're like, oh crap, I don't know if we're going to be able to even get to bullet 3 that I said we were going to do, right? And so I think that's where, and it's not because they don't want to, it's not because they're not trying, it's because they have a million fires to put out. And then even to get, some bipartisan, whatever you're trying to get passed, or whether it's, legislation or new, whatever it is, it's just much harder. It takes much longer. And so I think that's probably, for me, I'm like answering the own question, right? Like that's where people get frustrated, right? It's just, it's this constant, we're hearing this, we don't necessarily see it yet. It may take much longer. And then I think there's a whole nother aspect of, then you have to run for office again. You have to get reelected. Right. So then it's like, okay, well, the work has to be paused permanently, because now if I don't get it, we can't even come back to the work. So it's like, it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
You've been with Enterprise Community Partners for 6 years now. I think you touched on it briefly a little bit earlier, but how did you land that role? How did you learn about them and kind of what attracted you to them?
Yeah. So it's hard to believe I've been there for 6 years. I'm the state and local policy director at Enterprise Community Partners. Well, besides what I already said about needing a break from the government sector, I was just really thrilled to get back to my policy roots. So I had worked in the State House down in Columbus. I had worked at the Department of Development as a legislative liaison, which is really representing the interests of economic development, community development at the State House. That's what I love. That's what I love to do. I like to be a wonk. I like to get into the ideas. I like to figure out how to implement them and make them real. Communications was fun, but at the end of it, I was ready to move on, get back to policy, and Enterprise just came around at the perfect opportunity. I'm the first state and local policy director that our office has had. So it was really an opportunity to pull together a mission around housing and a policy platform that hadn't really been seen in our community up until that point. And I had been a generalist, as you can say. I had been a generalist in government. I had done a lot of different things, touched on housing a bit, community development, economic development, regional collaboration, et cetera. But it was exciting to kind of dive into the specifics. I'm still far from an expert in housing. I'll be the first to say that. I have colleagues who have done this for 30 plus years. They're incredible. I'm learning still, but I know a lot more than I did 6 years ago. And it's just been a real thrill to kind of put together a housing policy, something that is so important to our city, to our state, to our country, frankly, and try to push it to make it real.
So let's drill into the mission behind Enterprise. Tell us about the work your organization does and what you're involved in on a day-to-day basis.
So this is when I would say my really corny joke about how we're not the rent-a-car company. We're not Enterprise, the rent-a-car company. Yep. I say that all the time. It kills every time, I swear. No, Enterprise Community Partners, we're a national housing community development nonprofit. We've actually been around for about 40 years. We work all across the country. We have 13 market offices, including here in Ohio. We operate out of Cleveland. So there's an Enterprise Ohio office, but I also have peers all across the country. Our mission, our whole sort of reason for being around is the idea that housing and building strong communities is a stepping stone for opportunity. If you can get that foundation right, we believe that folks can succeed. We do it by increasing housing supply. We try to build what we call resiliency, upward mobility for folks. And we try to honestly address and advance racial equity. And that's kind of our core mission. We work on that, though, in a lot of different ways, which is sort of what I love most about Enterprise, but it's what's hardest to explain about us. We aren't necessarily the ones doing the work on the ground, but we're supporting the folks doing the work on the ground. We're bringing in some of that strategy, that coalition building, that convening that we know communities really need. And it looks different community to community. So what we do here in Ohio is not what our folks are doing in New Orleans or New York or San Francisco. It really is tailored to what our community needs and what is missing, what gaps that we can help fill in the community. So in Ohio, for instance, we run a whole slew of programs. We support other organizations and bring them together to do things like free tax preparation services. It's called the Cuyahoga EITC Coalition. We run and facilitate what's called the Housing First Initiative, which is our community's effort to end long-term homelessness. I run a program, and I've been doing this for about 2 to 3 years, on lead poisoning prevention called the Lead Safe Cleveland Coalition. So these are all the types of...
I didn't realize how big of an issue lead was in Cleveland. I had no idea.
Oh gosh.
When I was going through your Twitter, like, my goodness, I had no idea.
It's absolutely staggering. I mean, I could probably talk your ear off the rest of today. I mean, this Lead Safe Cleveland Coalition came together because the issue is so pervasive. And what's most scary about it, to me at least, is that it can affect anyone, and it's essentially permanent. So once a child's been exposed to lead hazards, the effects of it are irreversible for the rest of their lives. And it affects anything from sort of their physical health to their behavioral health, their intellectual capacity, their ability to read. I mean, the numbers are staggering. If a child is exposed to lead and lead poisoned, the the percentage of likelihood that they will be more likely to interact with the criminal justice system, they will fall behind in school, not be ready for things like kindergarten. I mean, it's staggering. It's staggering. And a lot of people think like Flint, Michigan, when they think about lead, right? Well, guess what? It's worse here in Cleveland, and it's not in our water. It's in our homes. It's in our housing. So this is that's a perfect example of the type of systemic problem that enterprise sees and thinks, okay, what can we bring to bear here? How can we help the community have a more systemic response to this huge problem?
So this past year obviously has been challenging for everybody throughout the country, but housing has been at the forefront of a lot of Americans' issues. What has the past year looked like for your organization and the people you serve?
I couldn't agree more. Housing has felt more important than ever. We're all staying at home, stuck at home, right? And a lot of children, families are in homes that are not safe or decent, affordable, or unstable, right? They might be living paycheck to paycheck, or they lost that job and they're at risk of losing their home. So housing has really never felt as important as it did during the pandemic. And I think what the pandemic did was just uncover the foundational importance of having housing security. In a place like Ohio, we often talk about how affordable it is compared to the coasts, for instance. And that's true, but we still have some pretty dire housing insecurity. And that's because we do have housing costs increasing at a pretty rapid pace. But more than that, more than how it's increasing maybe on the coast, is that our incomes aren't keeping pace. So we have incredibly low incomes. Folks aren't able to pay their rent, their mortgage. And then you add in a pretty uniquely kind of legacy city, Rust Belt city issue, which is our quality. Our housing quality continues to deteriorate. We have an older housing stock, and we're not doing a great job of maintaining it, fixing it up. So you take all those factors together, and the housing insecurity situation looks just as dire here in Ohio as it is in honestly other parts of the country. So this past year, we really felt that. The state, for the very first time, had to craft some housing assistance programs, some emergency assistance programs for folks that we honestly hadn't done before. We had been advocating for it for years. I had been advocating for certain things for years, but it really wasn't until the urgency of the pandemic came around, uncovered some of these insecurities and how vulnerable our whole kind of community and economy was if our housing sort of fell apart, if our housing structure fell apart. That was the impetus to get a lot done. So this past year, a lot of the things, the longer term things that I hope to get done were put on the back burner, and we focused on things like getting emergency rental assistance programs put together. We did that at the state level and at the city and county level. Again, first time these sorts of programs have been put together. We looked at things like the eviction moratorium, but making sure we were pairing that with things like rental assistance. So landlords could pay their mortgages, right? And they could get their bills taken care of. And sort of all the safety net services folks would need in order to really just stabilize our community. So if you're a homeless individual and you're planning on going to the shelter, well, you can't have groups of folks in a shelter. We know that that is a super spreader, right? So how do you do things like non-congregate shelter, which is, taking folks, individuals dealing with homelessness and getting them into maybe hotel settings or other settings, so they can't make, they can't risk one another with COVID. So that's the type of stuff that we sort of had to focus on during the pandemic, put pause in a lot of our longer term work, make sure it was continuing, but also taking care of these really emergent and frankly urgent needs.
So you touched on a lot there. I wanted to follow up on the equity and I would say the equity and just kind of wealth gap in the housing market. But this past year has been insane, and with the lack of supply, which is somewhat crazy to me, but with the lack of supply and then just the massive increase in demand, the housing market has never been hotter. It's insane. But like you mentioned, it's only highlighted or uncovered, as you said, the wealth and equity gap in the actual Ohio housing offering. So in your opinion, what does the future of housing look like or should look like?
Yeah, that lack of supply is indicative too of our stock. Our stock is such a poor quality. In so many parts of the city, we have this incredibly limited stock that's really of interest to folks. That's really of interest to those looking to buy homes. For me, I really think the big challenge ahead of us is equitable development. So if you're just looking at the city of Cleveland, we have pockets that are incredibly hot markets. Just like you described, you can't even keep a house on the market, right? And in those neighborhoods, you have folks feeling displacement pressure. They are seeing their property taxes increase. They're not able to keep up with those bills. Maybe they're not even able to afford sort of the maintenance, the deferred maintenance on their homes that they've been setting aside for years. So they're looking around them, seeing their market, their neighborhood catapult, and they're not able to keep pace. But then there's another story that's very real, pervasive, and frankly, it's happening in the majority of our Cleveland neighborhoods, often our brown and Black communities, our East Side communities. And that is that our markets are completely stagnant, that we cannot build essentially a housing market because the prices of these homes are so depressed because of historical disinvestment, segregation. We could go on, we could have a whole podcast about why some of our neighborhoods are sort of dealing with these stagnated markets the way that they are. But that issue is a lot different, and it's just as pressing, and we have to address it in order to have success as a city. So for those parts of the community, we need to figure out how to surge in value by either helping folks repair their home. We need to figure out how to do infill housing, so new housing to bring up the property values in the market, really kind of create a market in those neighborhoods. And that is what I'm thinking about when I think about equitable development. It's kind of a whole suite of tools. And right now we have, unfortunately, a lot of one size fits all tools. And what we need are more sort of strategic tools to help both those hotter market pockets, but then also those neighborhoods that need just incredible amounts of investment to get their housing markets kind of kicked off.
Yep. Who do you work with to get that investment started? Like who are you going to? Is it government? Is it private equity? Is it venture capital? I mean, who are you talking to?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a little bit of all of the above, right? It's got to be a public-private partnership to succeed. In my opinion, I do think government can and should lead the way on this. There are other communities that have put some pretty incredible tools in place for home repair, for access to capital, both for first mortgages, but for repairing homes. Government can come in and provide some of those tools, maybe create the baseline, right? Create the tools or the vehicles, and then you bring in private sector capital, like the banks, for instance, right? But yeah, I really think that our government can and should be leading the way. We've seen it happen in other communities. I think we'll get to it here in a little bit, but Enterprise would propose a number of tools and solutions that the city could relatively modestly invest in and really be the jumpstart to bring in some of that private sector capital.
Yeah, perfect transition. So you recently had a fantastic Twitter thread, A plus. I think there was 14 of them in the thread, which is awesome.
It's a long one, yeah.
So the thread was all about your thoughts on how Ohio should plan to spend President Biden's proposed American Rescue Plan, which is funny that it's like, look, I know people are going to disagree on how, and we'll get to the actual question, but people are always going to disagree on how we should actually do it. But this has been something that everyone, Republicans, Democrats, independents, has talked about that we needed to do since I was 5. Our roads have been bad for a long time. Our bridges have been bad. Our infrastructure has been bad. So I'm just a little frustrated with the amount of pushback that we're getting right now, which is not what the question is. But let's talk through some of the ideas in that thread. And if you wanted to highlight, 3, 4, or 5 of them that you think could get off the ground quicker than others, or you think have, more success rate early on to get started.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this is something that I think we've been kind of waiting for, hoping for a long time. It is truly transformational investment So the American Rescue Plan is the third and latest COVID relief package. It includes a lot of funding, it's in the trillions of dollars, right, in total. But one of the sort of streams of funding is directly to state and local governments. And it is essentially a pot of money for them to use to assist households in the community, perhaps fill budget gaps, et cetera. But it's sort of theirs and up to their discretion on how to use it within parameters set by the federal government. The state of Ohio is receiving $5.6 billion, billions, right? Billions. The Cuyahoga County is receiving $240 million, and the city of Cleveland is receiving $541 million. To put that into perspective, that is close to what our annual budget looks like in the city.
Wow.
So this is a whole nether insertion of money, of investment, of potential, huge change in our community, not just to respond to COVID, which we absolutely need to do, but it's this real opportunity to kind of build a bridge, in my opinion, towards more longer term recovery as a community. So I put together some ideas. I threw them on Twitter. Thanks for your Twitter support, Paul. What I was thinking when I threw out these ideas is we really have a rare opportunity here. And we should be thinking about this money not just as a way to backfill holes in the budget. We should be thinking about it as ways to make huge down payments on systemic problems and as a way to innovate. We have some solutions ready to go for these huge problems like lead poisoning prevention. I talked about the Lead Safe Cleveland Coalition. We've built a first of its kind fund to actually provide financial assistance to property owners, to landlords, to fix up their home and make them safe. So you can no longer, in the city of Cleveland, risk your tenants' health and safety with these lead hazards. We can, through this tool we call the Lead Safe Home Fund, give you loans, grants, and incentives to fix up your property. We know that when you do that, when you create a lead safe home proactively before a child's irreparably poisoned, we can essentially we can end lead poisoning in our community. So there is a solution, there is a mechanism. What we need is to make sure we have enough resources to continue to provide those loans, grants, and incentives. So how about City of Cleveland take a big chunk of that American Rescue Plan dollars and basically end lead poisoning in our community? And by the way, at the same time, invest in our homes. So I was talking about how desperately we need to do home repair. Well, making lead safe homes, I hate to break to you, that's doing home repair work. So take a big chunk of those American Rescue Plan dollars and essentially make a down payment towards ending lead poisoning in our community. That's kind of one of the systemic ideas. I think the other way we need to be thinking about it is innovation. So we are often barely making ends meet in government, right? We got to do these core functions and we never have enough money for it. Well, if you get a surge of dollars like this, isn't this an opportunity to try new solutions, right? Like we as a community are constantly coming up with new ideas, best practices, ways to address problems, but we can't even get the smallest morsel of dollars to see if it would work, right? So let's innovate. We have, for instance, a pilot program ready to go to help those individuals who are justice involved. So if you're a reentering citizen, we know how difficult it is, honestly, to find a job, but it's really hard to find housing. So many folks just close the door in your face if you have any sort of criminal background. So can we take a relatively small amount of money from the American Rescue Plan and pilot new solutions? So we're not just taking folks reentering society and saying, oh, well, good luck, you're on your own. But we create a pipeline and prove that it can work to keep those folks housed.
I love the innovation concept because I don't remember the podcast I was listening to, but it was exactly about that topic of the fact that government is not allowed to be innovative.
Right.
They're supposed to be innovative. They're supposed to do what they have, like you said, we have this amount of dollars and this is what we can do and that's it. Whereas it was basically comparing the tech world who, innovate all you want, waste millions of dollars. That's okay. It's what we expect you to do. If this idea didn't work, well, then raise another $100 million and another round and try another idea. Like we pour money into tech companies and new innovative companies in hopes that their idea will work. And in government, it couldn't be more opposite. And I think I love that idea. I mean, it makes me a little nervous for the backlash from your constituents, from Cleveland and from Cuyahoga County, just because, man, I can't imagine how angry they would be if you tried something and didn't work. But you can't have it both ways. You can't get mad that government doesn't innovate and then get mad when they attempt and maybe it didn't work out. So that's it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, everybody and their brother is coming up with a laundry list of ideas for the American Rescue Plan. So our community is kind of bringing all of its brilliance, its experience to bear. It's a tough spot that the city, the county, and the state are going to be in. They're going to have to come up with plans for this money. It's going to be incredibly scrutinized. I'll certainly be watching it to see how it plays out. But it's a huge opportunity. I've been advocating for things for years at Enterprise, like a local housing trust fund. Almost every other big city and community has something like that. It's essentially a local fund to support equitable development, affordable housing. We can't just imagine it into an existence. We have to smartly resource it into an existence. So isn't the American Rescue Plan a great opportunity to seed something like that? Like, let's seed a local trust fund. Let's make it happen into the future. And I really feel like if we miss that window, we will, really be in the long run kind of behind, even more behind than Cleveland sometimes feels of other cities. So yeah, I'll be watching with bated breath. There's just such huge opportunity here. And I really hope that we scoop it up and do some transformational, innovational stuff.
Yeah, it does feel like a bit of an inflection point and an opportunity where cities, let's say it all goes through and everything gets approved and all that stuff, the cities that take advantage and truly do innovate in 10, maybe even 5 years, but in 10 years for sure, you're going to look back and be able to see, wow, like what an insane idea, whether it's electric vehicle charging stations and whatever it is that they decide to do. You're going to be able to look back and say, man, that didn't go nearly as well. We shouldn't have done that. Or, wow, thank God we did innovate instead of filling budget gaps. You know what I mean?
That's right. That's right. But I'll tell you what, just to make sure I'm ending on a positive note here, this isn't our only bite at the apple. There is another, hopefully forthcoming federal package. It's the infrastructure package. So we have this COVID relief bill that is a huge amount of money. But then hopefully soon on the horizon, later in 2021, we're going to have an infrastructure package passed by Congress and President Biden. And that also has a huge opportunity for transformational impact. And that really gets to some of our core functions, like our roads, bridges, mobility, but also it can do a lot of great housing stuff. So we'll have another bite at the apple. Maybe we build that muscle with the American Rescue Plan. We get good at creating some of these big and small programs alike. And then when the infrastructure package comes, we'll be ready to go and totally transform our city.
Yep. Emily, this was great. We will get you out of here on 2 easy questions, but we would like to give our guests a chance to list their favorite places to live around town and around the state. And you have a unique perspective because you've lived a couple of different places. So you can pick your favorite place in Athens, Dayton, or Cleveland, or anywhere really. But favorite spot to eat, whether it be takeout or sit down or wherever, Athens or Cleveland. What do you got?
Yeah, well, in Athens, it's easy. It's a slam dunk. It's gotta be Bagel Street Deli. I implore everybody, if they go to Athens, to get a bagel sandwich at Bagel Street Deli. It's simple, but no one does it quite like Bagel Street. Yep. I daydream about that place, honestly. And here in Cleveland, I live on the near west side. I'm a total Cleveland stan, so I gotta pick a local place. And I'm Sicilian, right? I'm Italian, so I gotta pick Italian food. Right down the street from me is Bruno's, just the best little, tiniest little Italian restaurant. So everybody should check it out.
Bagel Street Deli and Bruno's. Got it. Okay, last one. Where can everybody find you, connect with you? LinkedIn, Twitter, website, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's dangerous, but I'm going to tell folks to find me on Twitter, right? You'll never know if I'm feeling in the mood for hot takes. Maybe you'll catch some on Twitter. But yeah, I'm E Lundgard. So yeah, ELUNDGARD. You can find me there. Usually, I keep it positive, but every once in a while, you might catch my hot take.
Love it. All right. Well, we'll be on the lookout for some hot takes here in the next couple of months. Emily, thank you again for coming on. Appreciate it. We'll talk with you soon.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Rust Belt Rundown. Make sure you check us out at rustbeltrecruiting.com. The Rust Belt Rundown is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and click on 5 stars if you enjoyed this episode. See you next time.